So let's take a look at this. This is, I think, in probably the top 10 most important figures in the book. It takes a little bit of work, so try to be patient to understand what's in it. But we're going to talk about this, and then we're going to come back and forth with it written out as words, back and forth until it makes sense. So once that imbalance exists, things start happening, right? That you can't stop from happening. So let's look here on the second line. It's going to cause altered reciprocal inhibition. So we'll go through each one of these. But when this muscle is tight, then what that is saying is this muscle is tight and it causes its partner muscle to lengthen, right? All that's saying is tight muscle causes weak muscle, all right? And then this leads to synergistic dominance, where it's like, now we have a weak muscle. So when it's time for that weak muscle to do its job, how's it going to do it, right? It's too stretched out. It's not going to be able to forcefully contract the way that it's designed to. So somebody else has to pick up the slack and do that job. And ultimately, the way that we can see this is because when the muscles are the wrong length, the joints are going to be pulled at the wrong angles. So we're going to be able to observe it through joint motion, right? We're not ever like actually inside their body measuring their muscles, right? We can see it only through the joint motion. All right, so let's go through this, what should happen versus what does happen, and then we'll come back to that slide. I always think of this in numbers. When I get these questions, I ask myself, are they talking about number 1, 2, 3, or 4? So in the perfect body, or in the body that we correct, the first thing is that we will have muscle balance, right? We're not going to have that muscle bunched up. We're going to have fixed that. When that one can pull at the right length, then its partner muscle can also pull at the right length. They're going to work like a pulley should. That means that we have the right length tension relationship. We're going to talk more about that later, but all that means is the muscles can do what they're supposed to. They can come to the right length. They can create the right amount of tension, just like they're designed for. It's always going to be called reciprocal inhibition. When we see that word reciprocal, we want to remember if you reciprocate something like you're working with somebody, you give, they give, right? The same thing happens with the muscles. One side short, the other side reciprocates by getting long. Now this side needs to contract, then this one gets long, right? So they work opposite of each other. That is reciprocal inhibition. All right, so we have this. Our first muscle can do its job. That allows our reciprocal opposite muscle to do its job. So whenever we need to actually engage the muscles, anybody else that needs to be involved in this movement, like these kind of secondary muscles that are going to be helping to produce force, right? Because nothing is ever just one muscle at a time, right? Then the helper muscles are going to be able to couple up together to produce force the right way. And this is called a force couple. Great. So if all of the muscles are working as they should, then step 4, we see the right motion of the body. Okay, so it's like if the calves are the right length, then it's not going to lengthen the front of the shin, right? When you drop down into a squat, all the muscles that come together to do that can do that. So what do we see? What joint motion do we see? They're able to squat with their toes pointed forward. They're not going to come out into a V. Okay? So arthrokinematics, arthro means joint, right? Think of arthritis. Kinematics, anything with kina is going to be movement. So arthrokinematics, joint movement. So as we're thinking about the muscles, the muscle that we're talking about is the first one. The muscle that works opposite of it, that stretches out when this number 1 muscle is contracting, is the one that does reciprocal inhibition. Anybody else that jumps in there to help out to make a movement happen is going to be part of the force couple. So picture that we're doing a push-up. We know that the pecs are the prime mover, right? But we also know that your triceps are going to assist that movement. Okay, so they're going to be part of the force couple. All right. And arthrokinematics then is just going to be, how do we actually move? So it's funny because where we start is at 4, right? When we are visually assessing people in motion, it's 4. But because we know what happens if 1 is broken, what is that going to look like by the time we get to 4? So if they have tight calves, their feet are going to turn out. Okay. So we see the feet turn out and then we kind of work our way backwards. All right. So whether they're asking the good way or the imbalanced way, we always want to get these into the right compartments. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to still be the same thing. It's just like the broken version of it. So if there's an imbalance, that's what we start with, right? The first muscle is too tight. Now, what that causes is what we're already aware of. We already know this from the assessments and from our Start Here video, where we learned the overactive, underactive muscles. When this one is tight, it causes the partner muscle to stretch out and get weak. It's still reciprocal inhibition, but it's altered because it's not good, right? So that is our second muscle. The third muscle are like the ones that are going to be helping out, same as the forced couple, except now, because something else is weak, they have to take over. You see this word dominance here. These are some of the easiest questions because you're going to see compensate for, take over, like these things that like you can picture that as something like about a power move, right? That somebody who's not supposed to be doing this job has to. So we also see the word synergist in there. Synergists are the helper muscles, right? We have agonists, prime mover, antagonists, opposing movers. Synergists, helpers, stabilizers are going to be what stabilizes the joint that's in motion. All right. So synergistic dominance, they take over. And then I wish that they called it altered arthrokinematics, right? That would follow the same pattern as altered reciprocal inhibition, but they don't. They call it arthrokinematic dysfunction, but we can recognize the similarity there, right? So that is saying if they have the tight calves, we're going to see the dysfunction because there's no way they can hide it. They can't squat without cheating, without turning their feet out. All right, so let's go through what happens with an imbalance. Here, we're gonna jump ahead to this, the example scenario. So let's say that we see that somebody's low back arches, right? Come down to the bottom. That is the arthrokinetic dysfunction, right? That is step 4. We see that they're low back arches. That's where we start. But what do we also know? Let's come up to the top. The main thing that's driving that excessive arch of the low back is tight hip flexors. So number 1, our muscle imbalance is tight hip flexors. What do the tight hip flexors do to the glutes? Stretch them out. They're weakened, they're lengthened. So that is our altered reciprocal inhibition. The interesting thing about these questions is a lot of times it's going to say overactive hip flexors decrease the neural drive to what muscle, right? All that question is saying is our number 1 muscle is tight. What is the second muscle that is going to get weakened, stretched out, lengthened? So part of this is just getting familiar with the words. As long as you understand what's happening, then it's easy to figure out what they're actually asking. Okay. Now think about this though. Hip flexors are tight in the front. Glutes are weak in the back. When you come into hip extension, right? So if you like if you just bend down, right? Bend down into a squat, we're in hip flexion, right? We know we are not using the glutes here. We're going to use the glutes to drive the body back up. Okay. So flexion, everything is bent. Extension, everything lengthens. That's when you're using your glutes, is for hip extension. So you also do that every single step, right? Like when you think of when your front foot hits the ground, it's bent, you're in that flexion. And then as you drive off of that, you're using your glutes to come into hip extension. All right. But what do we already know? These glutes are weak. So now when it's time for them to do their job, they can't do it. And it's not like they don't do it at all. They just can't do it properly. So your hamstrings also are involved in hip extension, but they're supposed to be like the B string, right? They are only supposed to be helping out the glutes, right? They have this secondary role, but your glutes can't do it. So your body's got to figure out a way to stand up tall, to push forward, whichever way you're moving. So that's where the hamstrings are going to take over. They are going to compensate for the weak glutes. Okay. So when we're thinking about this in the numbers, tight hip flexors, 1. That weakens the opposite muscle, the glutes, 2. When we want to use those glutes, they're going to be limited. So the helper of the glutes, the hamstrings, has to take over, 3. What do we actually see that allows us to know that this is happening? The low back arches too much during the overhead squat. Okay, so this page, just to kind